As an introduction, we'd like to acknowledge that our mission at Vose Library is to advance learning, inspire curiosity, enrich lives, and promote community. So with that in mind, let me introduce our guest. Gigi Georges turned to narrative nonfiction writing after an extensive career in politics, public service, and academia. A former White House special assistant to the president and the United States Senate State Director, she has taught political science at Boston College and served as program director at the Harvard Kennedy School. She and her family live in New Hampshire and Southwest Harbor, Maine. And I also want to add, even though she didn't put this in her bio, that Gigi and I both serve on the board for Island Readers and Writers, and I'm really excited to have her with us tonight. So without further ado, welcome, Gigi.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for your great introduction. Thank you for having me this evening. And thank you to all of you who are here tonight to join me in a conversation about Downeast. And I should add, being on the board of IRW should be front and center in my bio because it's such a wonderful experience. And for those of you who don't know Island Readers and Writers, please check it out. It's a wonderful nonprofit that serves many of the young people that I write about in Downeast. So I thought I would start tonight by doing a quick reading. Then I talk a little bit about how I came to write Downeast and show some slides to sort of bring the story alive a little bit more and to bring the girls alive a little bit more. And then we might close with some questions that I hope you'll participate in. I always love the question part of these. So let me set the scene for a very brief reading that comes at the very start of the book. The scene is that it's 2016. It's Downeast, Washington County. It's an hour north, as probably many of you know, of Bar Harbor, but a world away. And a caravan of 4,000 local fans has made its way to the Augusta Civic Center to cheer on their hometown girls from Narraguagus High, who are playing in the Class C state championship basketball game. They are the underdogs, and they come from towns of just a few hundred people away. It is an economically challenged place, a challenged place in many respects, as some of you, I'm sure all of you may know. And the girls are serious underdogs, but they pull out an improbable victory. And they're led and inspired by their coach, Olivia Marshall, who was also a trailblazing lobster fisherman. With 7 seconds left in the game, the Lady Knights led by 2 possessions. The gold ball was in their grasp, and the girls were dancing a bit, as Olivia called their last time out. No fouls, she exhorted, fighting to check her own exhilaration. Just let them shoot. But they were smiling, and Olivia was smiling, and she said, "Man, I'm proud of you," and sent them on their way. When the game ended, the roars were deafening, and the night-long celebration began. Every one of Harrington's 950 residents felt as if they had carried home the coveted gold ball. Along with neighbors from the adjoining towns of Addison, Cherryfield, Columbia, and Millbridge, they had made the 5-hour round-trip drive to Augusta Civic Center. They had followed their hometown girls since the season's late November start, from the gym at Narraguagus, where most of them had gone to school years earlier, to Searsport, Baileyville, Jonesport, and other hamlets along the Downeast corridor. As the season chugged along and the girls ground their way toward an 18-2 record, the people here found themselves forgetting, for a couple of hours each week, about where they'd find the money for the unpaid heating bill, or how many times they'd fixed the leaking roof on their aging double wide, about how the money wasn't coming in so fast once blueberry raking season had come and gone, or why this year's lobster yield wasn't even close to what they needed ever since Donnie had succumbed to the lure of fentanyl, about where they'd go without their neighbors knowing to stock up on food for the long winter that lay ahead. They found themselves forgetting, and they cheered for the squad with an average height of 5'5", They cheered for the multi-talented coach, Olivia Marshall, who gave the girls something to strive for on and off the court. And they cheered for the possibility that this once robust set of communities could beat the odds in other ways. Because if a group of underdog girls could lift themselves up from the valley of the overlooked, surely they could too. So that comes at the opening of Downeast, and this is the book itself, if you haven't seen it. And it then follows these 5 young women through the course of their coming of age. From the ages, I followed them from 16. One of them was 16, the rest were 18 or older for the 4 years that followed. I reported on the ground with them. And I thought before I'd get into a little bit about the stories of the girls, I would give you a little bit of a sense of how I came down east, because I am a kid who was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I am not a Mainer. I had spent my whole life in urban places. I grew up in a big immigrant Greek family. Think my big fat Greek wedding and you'll see my family. And I was working from the time I graduated college in New York, in Washington, D.C., and then up to Boston. But it really, really wasn't until my husband and I, who met and married in New York, made the decision to move to Northern New England about 15 years ago, that I started to think about rural issues. I had largely worked in urban policy issues, particularly education policy, had the great fortune to work in the White House doing policy work as well for a time. And when my husband and I got to Northern New England, New Hampshire and Maine, and started to raise our daughter, who is now almost 10, I started to look around and listen more carefully to the dominant narrative about rural places. And what I was hearing was so much about hopelessness and despair, and very little of an optimistic strand. And I wanted to dig deeper. I wanted to know more. I particularly wanted to understand what was going on in the hearts and minds of young people in rural Maine. And so we have had a house in Southwest Harbor for quite a few years. My husband has been coming to Maine for many, many years, and he fell in love with it first. And when I fell in love with him, I fell in love with it too. And I decided to sit down with a dear friend, Reverend Scott Planting, who then ran the Maine Seacoast Mission. And he was in Bar Harbor in his offices at the time. And I said to him, do you think you can help me sort out what I'm trying to think about? Do you think you can help me see what it's like for young people growing up in the most rural parts of Maine? And he said, you don't have to go far. Get in your car, drive an hour up the coast, and you'll find yourself in Downeast, Washington County. And what you'll see there might surprise you. He introduced me to the superintendent of schools there and to the high school principal of Narraguagus. And they in turn took this outsider, this true from awayer, and embraced me and welcomed me in and allowed me to sit down with upperclassmen, boys and girls at Narraguagus, and do some informal chats. And these kids just opened up. And what I saw and heard was something so, so amazing. In the macro sense, what I was amazed by and what was so wonderful to see was, despite the many challenges, economically and otherwise, that Downeast, Washington County faces, these kids were tied to place, were rooted to place, loved Downeast. They complained about the lack of movie theaters and sort of not having that much to do, but they really did appreciate their homes in the broader sense. And they were optimistic about their futures, even though economic opportunities are somewhat limited. The second thing that jumped out at me, that was the root of why I wrote this book the way I did about 5 young women, was that the young women were surpassing the boys in almost every respect, academically, athletically, in extracurricular activities, in leadership, both within and outside the school. And it struck me that something was going on, that I needed to dig deeper to understand what was going on with the girls who were at the top of the honor roll every year, who were, as I said, taking on leadership roles, and were really digging in the sense that so many of them told me that they wanted to stay and build in their hometowns, build their lives, build within the community, and build in the sense of opening doors and bridging from the traditions that they so respected and honored to what they believed represented progress for the places that they had grown up, that they did not want to abandon their hometowns. And while they all recognized, as I do, that the choices they made to stay or go were equally honorable, were equally to be celebrated, many of them felt, as did the 5 young women that I got to know so intimately, that we ought to be celebrating as much as we do those who leave, those who make a decision to stay. And so that was the beginning of my journey down east. And out of that, I came to tell the stories of these 5 amazing young women. This book works on 2 levels. The one level is their stories, and I'll just do a brief synopsis of each of them just to give you a flavor, and some of you may have already read the book, but to give you a flavor. But the second macro level of this book is that, as I alluded, despite the constant drumbeat that we all hear and read about in many accounts about rural places, of downbeat depictions of hopelessness, of despair, of challenges, there is a counter narrative. And that is that these communities like Downeast, Washington County, are thriving in the face of these challenges. They have tremendous social capital. They band together to help each other, neighbors helping neighbors. And they believe that together they are stronger, and they live that. And I'm happy to talk about examples of that, but it was in many ways an aha moment for me to see that and to experience that, and to see the way in which they want to be seen and honored for the choices that they make. So these are the girls. There is number 1, Willow, who comes from a really difficult circumstance. She grows up in a household that is unfortunately burdened by both substance abuse by her father and physical abuse in the house. She moves 7 times before she's 8. She moves at one point to her paternal grandparents' house, and her grandmother is shipped away on a felony count to prison. There is a lot of concern over issues of control around her grandfather and her father. Though Willow finds her way, she is not a victim, and she goes through a roller coaster over the 4 years that we spent together and over the course of her young life. But she finds anchors in the mentorship of a wonderful art teacher, Franny in the book, who shows her that her photography is spectacular and shows her that she can find herself and build her self-esteem through the pursuit of that photography. And she finds her love for Downeast, and she finds her love of the wharf that she works in, a place where she can go and think about and reflect on what her future path is. Second is her best friend, Vivian. Vivian comes from an established family down east. And she herself is a wonderfully talented writer, a soulful person, an incredibly deep thinker, and a sensitive person. And she goes through her own sets of troubles as her parents are divorced, and she deals with doubts and questions about the values of her church. They come from a very strong faith, and of her hometown. She ends up finding her path through pursuing a nursing degree all the way up in Holton. So she goes to an even more remote part of Maine and meets a young man, and they're now engaged and doing really well, and she's finishing her nursing degree. Third is Josie, who is the class valedictorian, the second ever from Narragansett High to go to Yale. Her older sister was the first to go to Yale. So it's an extraordinary family. They are not a multi-generational family. The grandparents come as homesteaders from Pennsylvania, and they make their roots there as farmers, as dairy farmers. And this family becomes really integrated into the community, becomes welcomed. They are also of strong Baptist faith. They're pillars in the community and in the church. And Josie finds her own set of questions and her own set of searching as she has one foot down east and one foot in New Haven, with all that brings. And she raises questions about her own future and her own sense of where she's going. Fourth is McKenna. McKenna is a Spitfire. She is the one who wants to be a lobster fisherman from the time she could walk. Finally, after she begs her dad for years, at the age of 8, he says to her, "Come on, you're coming with your brothers, and we'll make you a sternman. We'll make you into a sternman." And she falls in love with lobster fishing. She's also an incredible softball player. And she is one who is so full of energy and so full of optimism and so full of confidence. She pursues her studies in school as vigorously as she pursues her career as a lobster fisherman. And by the time she is at the age of 17, she's captaining her own boat. She, however, faces a crossroads around whether to go to college or to continue fishing full time on graduation, and ends up, at the urging of her parents, pursuing a 2-year business degree, which she has, I'm happy to say, just completed while fishing full time. Finally, Audrey. Audrey is an incredible leader. She's the star of the 2016 basketball team that goes to the Class C championship and wins. And Audrey is also an incredible student who earns a coveted scholarship to Bates. However, she is very tied to Downeast in every respect. And she does not find what she needs at Bates. She wants to be a speech pathologist. She wants to go and serve the people in her community with those much needed services. Bates does not offer that route in a very clear and linear way. And so she makes what many would perceive as an agonizing decision, but what for her was actually an easy one, an obvious one, to leave Bates by the end of at the end of her freshman year. She's playing basketball for Bates. She's doing really well, but she comes home, transfers to UMaine, and pursues that dream of studying speech pathology, is now doing her graduate work at UMaine and serving the community at the same time. Audrey is the living example of what I talked about when I talk about those who want to stay and build. So that is the basic set of what the stories are about. We follow them through ups and downs, through questions, through good times and bad times. And perhaps this is a good time for me to just show some slides and talk through a little bit, and then maybe have a chance to open it up for questions. So I'm going to share my screen. So as I'm sharing, I will say I used pseudonyms for the young women in the book. And so I did that largely, actually 4 out of the 5 were absolutely willing to use their real names. But the 5th Willow, understandably, wanted to preserve her anonymity. And I felt strongly, and all these girls know each other well. And the other four felt strongly that they wanted to help her preserve that as much as possible outside the community. And so we changed all of the names. All of the girls knew, including Willow, that everyone in the community would be able to know who they were. And they were totally fine with that. They all read their sections. They were very much a part of the creation of this book. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm very proud of the fact that since publication, they have all embraced the book, and that 3 of them have actually participated using their real names in events and media appearances and interviews. So let me start with the slides just by, I think that probably all of you have a good sense of where Downeast, Washington County is, but it's always good to orient yourself. And we certainly put a map in the front of the book for those who are not from Maine or who don't know the area, to give them a sense of both the vastness of the area, the remoteness, the sense of how it could be so geographically isolated and so remote. And as you all know, the population density in Washington County is really, really low. So this is McKenna. And McKenna is the lobster fisherman. She is just such an extraordinary young woman. They all are, each in their own respects, but she is full of energy, and she is there. I had the privilege of being her sternman fishing more than once, and actually once went out with her mom. Her mom and I shared the sterning role, and I was, of course, the poorest sternman, but they really put up with me, and I did my best, and they had such good humor about it. And there she is on one of our trips, proudly showing off her one of her more sizable catches. One of the things that was so striking with McKenna was that she did not take any guff from the boys. And she would say to the boys, you guys complain a lot about fishing and doing your schoolwork and having to do extra work at home. And a lot of these kids do, more than one job, even from a young age. And she said, I would say to them, I'm doing it, and I'm not complaining, and you shouldn't complain either. And it was really fun to spend time with her and to spend time with her family as well. A really wonderful family. This is actually the family wharf, Holt Wharf in the book. Gives you a sense of just the beauty of it and the size and the scope of this wharf. This is a family that started with virtually nothing. And they built this through hard work and determination and having a dream, her parents, that they wanted to own a working wharf. And they did it, and they're continuing to really work through it with her and her brothers, all being a part of that, as so many fishing families are. This is Audrey, the basketball star who went off to Bates and then transferred to UMaine. And this is her at the championship game. She also comes from a fishing family, although interestingly, unlike McKenna, the clue about how she feels about fishing, which she continues to do every summer now, even while she's in graduate school to help the family out, is that she named her fishing boat No Interest, to indicate how she felt about fishing, even though her family is well into the lobster fishing trade. This is the team, the 2016 championship basketball team. And you'll see Audrey is in the center, number 20, and then 2 over to the right, you can see McKenna, and next to her, Olivia Marshall, the coach, who, as I said, is a trailblazing lobster fisherman and also a championship lobster boat racer. Now, I think for the 3rd year running, if I'm not wrong. And she is a remarkable person. She was a mentor and role model to so many of these young women, Audrey McKenna and so many others that I got to spend time with and speak with. And she was a mentor, both in the sense of showing what it takes to be a competitor, both on and off the basketball court, to do it with grace and to do it with determination. But she was also a tremendous role model for young women, increasing numbers of them, who want to fish and who have the desire to captain their own boats. She did it at a time when almost nobody was doing it. And she's now early 40s. She named her boat, her fishing vessel, the Gold Digger, in honor of that championship team. And there they are together. So this is me. This on this particular, I went out quite a number of times and served as stern for both McKenna and for Olivia Marshall. And this is one of the trips I did with Olivia with her sister, who at that time was her sternman and had been for many years. And that's Olivia in the background. And it was really just such an education for me. This is blueberry barrens at harvest time. And I put this in just to give a little bit of a sense of what it's like there, but really more to point to Vivian's story. Vivian was the best friend of Willow, who then ends up going up north to live in an even more remote part of Maine, or a more distant part of Maine. And this is Vivian's family's blueberry farms. And we went out there during harvest time, and it was a great experience as well. Each of these experiences were so rich because these girls allowed me to not only sit and interview them over the course of 4 years, but to spend real time with them in the places they loved, in the places that brought them memories, in the places that they grew up working. And I was able to meet their families, meet their friends, spend time with them in various settings, and really get a sense of what their journeys were about through those experiences together. This is a sign that really struck me in the hallway of Narraguagus High, the main hallway. And I noticed this sign the first time I went to Narraguagus, and I went back many, many times over the course of my reporting. And staying isn't settling. Underneath this sign, underneath this poster, are the pictures with little blurbs of young people who graduated from Narraguagus over the recent years and who made a decision to either return or to stay and build their lives down east, along with what they chose to do, their careers, their paths. And it was an incredible signal that this leadership in the high school was sending, to say there is a path if you so choose. There is a path for you to stay and be a part of this community if that is something that you desire to do. I'm segueing over to Willow for the final few slides. This is a photo that I took, and then I'm going to share some really good photos that Willow took. But this was just one of those days that I went to visit with Willow. Typical fog, right? Up in Jonesport at the wharf that she worked in from her high school years and continues to work in. This was the place that truly sustained Willow in her toughest years. She would go out, sometimes drive at night when the wharfs were closed for business, and just lie out and look out and think about, as she said it, everything that she had to be grateful for, despite the incredible challenges that she had. And among those things was her rootedness, her connection to Downeast, because of people like Vivian and her family who took her in when she was at her lowest point and had her live with them. People like Franny, the art teacher, who showed her that she had talent, and others in the school and outside of the school who really were her safety net and her path toward a better life. Finally, I'm going to close with the slides to show you just a few of the photographs that Willow has taken over the past number of years. And they serve a dual purpose, one to show her amazing skill and talent and her eye, but second to just show that beauty, that stunning nature that we find down east, every bit as beautiful as other parts of Maine that, as I write in the book, draw busloads and billionaires. And so I'll close. And that figure on the end there is in a couple of these photographs. That's her fiance, who is, I had the good fortune, he's a scallop boat fisherman, and he goes down to Massachusetts for 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time on these big vessels. But I am happy to report that Willow, who went through some really tough times, that's him again, is just very happily settled with her fiance. My husband and I had the really great fortune to go visit with them over this summer, and had a lovely time with them, and came away with 2 big bags of scallops that we were all really enjoyed. Even my 10-year-old daughter enjoyed them. And that is essentially the slideshow. And I think, maybe this is a good point at which to stop and see if there are any questions, and, maybe just zero in on some of the things that you may be wondering about, or you may be thinking about. I'd love to do that at this point.
Thanks, Gigi. So folks can unmute. We also have a question already in the chat room, so I'll start with that. Doug is asking, how did you select these 5 young women to be the personalities in your book?
So I had the opportunity to, as I mentioned, to sit down with quite a few of the young people at Narraguagus High at the very, very early stages of my decision to write this book. And we did some informal focus groups that were set up by the then principal of the high school. And out of those conversations, I first, as I mentioned, made the decision to report on and focus in on young women. I knew from those conversations that I was looking for a collective group of, at that point, I thought 4 or 5 young women who, taken together, would represent a microcosm of life in Downeast, Washington County. And so I knew that there were certain lanes that I wanted to go down. I knew, for example, that I wanted to capture the life of someone who aspired to be a lobster fisherman, because I knew that was in such a dominant industry. And I was fascinated by the idea that young women were breaking into this, not just as sternmen, but as captains. I knew that because, unfortunately, there are so many challenges and there is so much poverty in Washington County, that I would want to portray, at least with one of the young women, those challenges in the deepest sense. And I didn't know where that would take me. I didn't know where her story would go, but I did consult with the high school principal when I thought about following Willow and approaching Willow, and she and I talked about her and a few other young women. Unfortunately, there are too many, as I have been told by so many in the community. There are far too many Willows in Downeast, Washington County. And so I in consultation with the high school principal, approached Willow to represent that piece of it. I knew that I wanted to have one young woman who really was that more typical story, I thought, of the one the 1 in a million who gets out and goes off to this Ivy League college and doesn't look back. And I have to say that Josie surprised me, because I thought it was going to be that story that we've all read so many accounts of, and they're thrilling stories, and they're wonderful stories, and they represent something really important and meaningful. But Josie came around and really she showed me and even said to me as recently as just this past summer, you know, going through these past 4 years, she said, I gained so much of a greater appreciation for Downeast. I gained it by going through the time that I've gone through at Yale. She's now in her senior year. And I gained it by thinking and reflecting on everything that I've been through and everything that I hope for. And well, I don't know if Josie will ever settle back in Downeast, Washington County. What she was very clear about, even this past summer, was that she will always maintain a piece of herself in it, either by giving back or by returning physically and by sharing her own experiences and hopefully serving as a role model to others. And with Audrey and with Vivian, I thought that in part, with Vivian, her personality and her sort of status in the community, and yet having to grapple with some really big questions about place and about her role in that place, that was another important theme that I found resonated through all of the other young women that I spoke with, because I spoke with quite a few young women to try to get a sense of what that microcosm would represent more broadly. And then finally with Audrey, I felt it was incredibly important to demonstrate something that is far more prevalent in the lives of young women and men, but we were focusing on women, young women in places like Downeast, Washington County than people think. And that is the one who really does want to continue to be a part of the community, who has the ability to lead and will maintain a leadership role, and who will give back in ways that are too many to be enumerated, in terms of her work and her service, in terms of raising a family there, in terms of leadership in the community and on a volunteer basis, and in terms of what she projects to the outside world about her energy and enthusiasm for this place that to outside eyes may seem so much less than it really is.
Thank you, Gigi. Jeff is asking, can you talk about analogies between rural Maine and other parts of rural America?
Yes, I've gotten this question. It's been interesting to talk about Downeast and to be doing events and media for the book inside of Maine and then well beyond Maine. And this question invariably comes up as I talk to audiences and do interviews in places as far as California, Michigan, southern states, and pretty much all around. And what I have said to this question is that I have seen, when I did the work for this, I did it in two ways. I did the reporting on the ground, but I also spent a great deal of time getting a sense of the broader landscape of rural America. Now, I couldn't go out to all of these places, but I could read and I could follow the data and I could follow the census tract material. And I did as much of that as possible. And what I came to realize in doing that, and then also speaking to people anecdotally who knew about other places, was that what I was seeing in Downeast, Washington County was being reflected in other places as well. And that you could, for example, I remember talking to someone on Michigan Public Radio, and she had read the book and she said, I read this and I just kept nodding my head. And she was from Western Michigan and a more rural part. She said, I kept thinking you could just swap out cherries for blueberries and you could swap out trout fishing for lobster fishing. And this is our story. And I heard that from someone in Ohio just the other day that I was speaking with for a book club. And she said, I grew up in Ohio and I just kept looking at this. In Western Pennsylvania, the same. And how much it resonated. And to me, that is second to only to knowing that the Downeast, Washington community felt that it honored them. is the greatest praise, because I felt like I did capture something that is meaningful, that is underreported, and that is widespread, and that ought to be, as a result of that, a part of our national conversation about rural America. And I think it is an incredibly important part of it, both the voices of young women and that more optimistic strain that many, many people in rural places have, despite the tremendous challenges they face.
All right, Gigi, another question from Doug. The people of Downeast are pretty notorious for not trusting people from away. How did you build trust so that you were able to get inside the rural life of Downeast?
So Doug, I had so much trepidation about going because of course I worried that certainly, I tell you, not just because of reputation, but I thought about any sort of stranger coming into a community, particularly a smaller community, and saying, hey, will you open your lives to me and just tell me stuff? That is quite a bold move, and something that I wouldn't have blamed them if they had looked at me and said, well, no, not really. But I have to tell you, from the very first moment, from my very first meeting, which was with the school superintendent of school district MSAD 37, he was wonderful. I mean, we spent 2 hours in that first conversation, and it could have gone on longer. And then meeting the school principal, the two of them initially, I think, made a tremendous difference in the way in which they signaled to others around them that I was someone that they trusted. And I am so grateful to them for allowing me to go through that door, for giving me that trust, because that in turn helped me build trust, not only with the 5 young women who were just extraordinary in the way that they opened their lives to me, and I will always be grateful to that, and I consider them friends today, and I hope we will always be friends, but also to the broader community, to the many, many people who were willing to sit down with me and to speak with me openly and candidly about what they were seeing and what they were experiencing, and to tell me their stories. And so I have to tell you, I didn't get any of that sense of being from away. And perhaps it was because I did not presume to know any better than anyone there. And I was really there to listen and to learn and to understand with an open mind and an open heart. And in many ways, I feel as though Downeast is simply a vessel for these 5 young women and their tremendous community to show themselves and reveal themselves in an open and honest way to outsiders.
All right, we have a couple more questions. So Ginger is saying, 2016 saw the election of Donald Trump. I hope I'm not stereotyping, but was there any awkwardness regarding political differences between you and the girls / others in the community?
That's a great question. The answer is none. So a couple of things on that. One is, this is not a political book, and I went into it really wanting it not to be something political, because I think that this ought to be transcending politics, and that was my hope. And the girls and I, we didn't really talk a lot about politics, but when we talked about ideas, and to the extent we did talk about politics, and this was true with other members of the community, I have to say, I honored and respected their views. And I thought we had some really wonderful conversations. And one of the things that I hoped for in this book, maybe not in the sense of sort of politics as we think about it, but in a broader sense, was that perhaps by allowing these girls to express themselves in every respect and to have themselves seen as whole people, and allowing this community to be seen in its whole essence, that perhaps we could do just a little more bridging of that divide. And I remain hopeful that this account and other accounts, I hope, in this vein might help do that, because we really are in a place where we're too divided, where we are talking past each other. And that is the last thing I wanted to do. I was there to listen. And what I heard, I have to say, I have the utmost respect for the views and values of these young women and how they perceive themselves within Downeast, within the broader community, and within the world.
All right, there are more. So Dan is saying, your focus is on the 5 young women. While you did not focus on the young men, do you get the sense that many of them have the same amount of determination to commit their energies to Washington County?
That's a really great twist on a question that I've gotten a lot of, which is, what about the boys? But I love the way that you asked this question, because I think it gets a little deeper. And I think they do have the determination. I know they do. So the boys are quieter, at least around me. And so it was a little harder to quite get the feel. But what I watched and I saw, whether it was by interviewing boys on their own or by meeting brothers and boyfriends and friends and just other boys around these young women and other young men around these young women, was that they are very, very hard workers. They are very determined. They share many of the same sensibilities and values as these young women. I think that where there is a question and a difference, and I don't want to put everyone in the same box, because there are different levels of achievement among young women and young men. But where there is a difference, I think it is that the boys, by and large, are not sort of taking those top roles. They are not taking the top honors. They are not moving into as many leadership roles. And I think there are a lot of questions around why that's so. I asked almost everyone I spoke with. I interviewed at least 150 to 200 folks, either in the community or connected to the community. And almost every one of them, I asked a question about the boys, because I was so curious about it. And some said that perhaps it was because the boys are on this path, many of them from a very, very early age, knowing that they're going to fish, for those who are fortunate enough to be either in fishing families or to secure a sterning spot, and that they are more linear in their pursuits. That may be. And then there was the comment by the school principal, which I thought was just so interesting and so worthy of sort of thinking over and talking about. And she said, we had a long conversation about this one day, and she said, I wonder sometimes if, in lifting our girls up, which has absolutely been the right thing to do, that perhaps we've sent a signal to some of our boys that they are somehow not measuring up, or they are somehow less than. And I thought that was an interesting strain to follow, and one that perhaps tied in with the question of role models, might have some elements really worthy of looking into. And I've often thought, since the publication of Downeast, that I might love to just even take my hand at an article about this, if not a book.
I hear a book. Okay. And Archie's asking, for years in education in this country, there's been a lack of understanding and leadership of the needs of rural communities. Do you think your book could have an impact on opening eyes to the real needs?
I hope it contributes to that. The book itself, while it is largely it is absolutely an optimistic take on the future of rural places. It is also one that recognizes and calls out some of the really difficult issues that places like Downeast, Washington County face. We know that poverty, particularly childhood poverty, is persistent. That in Washington County, for example, we have the highest level of persistent childhood poverty of any state in New England. And so we have that. We have the opioid crisis, which unfortunately has hit so many of our rural communities so hard. And that's not to say that it hasn't hit urban and suburban places. It certainly has. But it is a significant problem and one that is really tough. I spent the time that I spent, I would have to say, there was almost not a family that wasn't in some way affected by the opioid crisis in Downeast, Washington County, whether it was a member of the family or a close friend or a neighbor. And so I think that these issues, you know, obviously the closing down of factories, the closing down of processing plants, and the search for other economic opportunities. I had the privilege of spending a great deal of time with the executive director of the Sunrise County Economic Council, which is Washington County's economic development hub. And I am very indebted to him because he really gave me a tremendous amount of data, and more than that, a tremendous amount of insight through the time he spent with me about what the economic challenges and opportunities are in Downeast, Washington County and in rural places like that. And so I tried in this rendering of Downeast to weave in the realities of those difficulties. And my hope is that whether it is through Downeast or through some of the really, really tremendous work that's been done by others, and I think in particular of Angus Deaton and Case's Deaths of Despair, which came out now, it might be about a couple of years ago, that really gets to the question of largely rural, largely white middle-aged men in particular who are dying young, and what that and particularly the opioid crisis and suicides, and they shone a tremendous light on that particular crisis and problem. And there are other books that are shining similar lights on other aspects of the challenges that I saw. So all of this is incredibly important. It is an important part of the conversation. And the long answer to the long answer to your question is all of that. The short answer is yes. But I do want to come back to the other half of this, which is to show as well that these challenges that are incredibly real are also being addressed not only from above through government help or through nonprofit help, both of which are incredibly important, but in the way that these communities band together to help each other. And that aspect of the story is equally as important as the sort of parts that we often dwell on, which is the challenges. Because the folks that I met, they talked about the challenges, but in the same breath, they talked about the ways in which they rallied for each other and how important it was for their sense of well-being, mentally and otherwise, to be there for each other and to help them find their way. And whether it was through the bean suppers or the church gatherings or the school board meetings, that in combination with the nonprofit help and the government help was extremely important.
Thank you, Gigi. Are there any other questions people wanted to ask before we close for tonight? Let's see. Ginger saying, thank you. I love the book and really enjoyed this presentation. Dan, I'm no expert on literature, but I recollect that many tales feature a hero's journey where often a mile like Odysseus and Harry Potter make a single trip through many trials and makes a series of journeys through trials to reach or make a home. Is it sexism that brings those tales through time, or do women simply not need to make those trips as men do? New one for you. I don't know if we have time to answer that one, Gigi. My goodness.
I know that might have to be left for another time. There's all such good food for thought.
Gigi, I just wanted to say, you know, it's such an honor to have you with us tonight. You've been on the Today Show. You've been all across the nation. And to take time to be with us through Vose Library, I am absolutely honored. I couldn't wait to read your book, having lived in Jonesport for a few years. And just, you know, I had trouble with the pseudonyms because I kind of knew some players. And it was just really, it brought it all back for me. And thank you for your good talent and for sharing tonight all of the sort of backstory. That is so important when we read, to have us connect even further. And
thank you.
Yeah, so I'm just going to end with my little spiel that I typically end with, that this concludes our presentation for this evening. Please note that we plan to skip October 6th and in turn encourage you to join our local historical society's monthly presentation. All of us at Vose Library thank you for attending our Vose or virtual Wednesday series, and we hope you'll spread the word and also join us on Wednesday, October 13th at 7 p.m. when Bill Berlinghoff shares his folk singing talent with us. We hope to see you there. Good night, everybody. Be well and stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care.